Hey guys, Greg Benz here with a quick demonstration of a cool new feature in Lumenzia version 5 that will allow you to work with complex files of essentially any size and still view them in Lightroom. If you've ever run into this error message in Photoshop saying that you can't save a file because your PSD is larger than 2 gigabytes or your TIFF is larger than 4 gigabytes, you know what I'm talking about, because you either have to start making changes to your image, flatten it, or switch over to the PSB file format, which is not visible in Lightroom. So let's take a look at our options. If you're doing luminosity masking with Lumenzia, well, you could go and use the blend if masks, which I've already done extensively on, looks like probably about 6 different layers here. So that saved a lot of file size, but I've already squeezed that down. We could look at using the new vector mask option that would replace a lot of layer mask potentially, but in this case it doesn't really apply to this particular image. Or we could look at using the combine function to take a layer mask like this and start applying it to the child mask and reduce the size of these complex multi-layer masks that are common in luminosity masking. But ultimately the problem with this file is it was focus stacked with images from a Nikon D850. So we have all of these really big pixel layers underneath, and the only way I'm going to squeeze this file any further is either turn on compression, which I don't want to do because I can save the file faster without it, or switch to the PSB file format, which let's try that right now. So we're going to do a file, save as, and we choose the large document format, otherwise known as PSB or Photoshop Big. You can see the PSB extension. And this will allow us to save our original file in any size with no limits in terms of Photoshop, but it's going to have some limits over in Lightroom. So we've just saved the file. Photoshop says that it should be about 2.9 gigabytes. Let's take a look at the actual file, and it's clocking in at almost 5 gigabytes. So it's not an uncommon situation where the estimated size in Photoshop says you're within the limit, but you're actually not. And that's just the reality. Is until you save the file, Photoshop's taking its best guess at how big the file is going to be. And so a lot of times you may think you're safely in the limit, and you're just not. It is what it is. But the problem with this file is not so much that it's large, for me anyway, but when you go to Lightroom, I can try and synchronize this file folder and it won't show up because the PSB file format is not supported in Lightroom. So the place where I manage all of my images, I can't see these big files, and that's a problem for me. So that's why we're going to use this new function in Lumenzia. What I want to do is take some of this content and move it to an external file. That will make this file smaller. All the original data is retained as a smart object in an external file. So I maintain the ability to edit everything, but I'll be able to save a smaller TIFF file. And here's how that works. So we're going to go up to the top right of Lumenzia. We have this menu option called Convert Layers to Linked PSB. And when I click on that, I have the option to either convert all the layers in the document or just my selected layers. In this case, I just want to export the focus stack. The adjustments I made above it aren't really that big, and I'm more likely to make changes there. So I'm just going to export this portion of the document and give it a second for Lumenzia to prepare the export. And now we just have to choose where to save this export. So what's happening is we've converted to a smart object, and now we're going to send it externally as a PSB file. So we're creating a second file. We're basically taking some of this file and moving it externally. So I'm just going to call this my exported focus stack and hit save. And we see that the focus stack was replaced with this smart object. We have a little link icon. If we double click this, we'll be able to open it up and edit the original layer. So everything is in one place here, but notice that the file size has shrunk down to an estimated 800 megs, quite a bit smaller. Let's see how small it actually is. So we want to save this now as our lean master file. Let's call it that. We want to save it as a TIFF format because we'll be able to see that over in Lightroom. So now we've completed that save. At this point, we've exported our content. When we're at the moment of export, we save that as a separate file, and then we save this master file. So we now have 2 files that are related. And if we go over to the Finder, we can see all 3 files. So we have the original file that we saved that was almost 5 gigs. Then we have the exported focus stack layers as a separate PSB file. That's the content represented by this smart object here. And then we have the master file we saved, this lean master TIFF, which is clocking in still at 2 gigs, but I didn't turn on compression. So it definitely would have been under 1 gigabyte for this master file had we done that. But more importantly, when we jump over to Lightroom, now we can right click, choose to synchronize, and see that it's detecting one file. We have 2 PSBs that are invisible, and we have our master TIFF that is visible. And now we can see this document in here. So let's go over to the original. And so now we're still working on this parent file. And if we were just to turn off, for example, some of the adjustments I made, and now I'm just going to hit Command S to save the file. And I jump back into Lightroom, and you can see it just caught up here. So this linked file, we can see that all the changes we make in Photoshop are visible now in Lightroom. And let's jump back to Photoshop. If I wanted to change this focus stack, all I have to do is double click on it. And just like any smart object, it's going to open up in a separate window where I can edit the underlying layers. So this is the original content that we export. You can see these are all the layers I originally selected. I can make any changes I want to them here. I can change the mask to fix issues, whatever I want to do. When I'm done, I can just simply close the window and choose to save any changes there. And that will be saved back into this smart object for me. So I've retained all of that data and the ability to see everything in Lightroom. The only trick to this process is make sure you're always saving your external file in the same folder. See, I've put the external PSB in the same folder as the TIFF. You don't have to do this, but the relationship between them is relational. So if they're always in the same folder, I can do anything I want. I can rename this folder, I can move it to another location, and that linkage will not break. The only thing that's going to break that linkage is if I take my external file and move it to a different folder without the parent document, or if I rename it. And if you do that, here's all that happens. Let's move this away here. And you'll see immediately get this little red question mark in Photoshop just telling you, hey, where is this thing? If I double click on it, it's going to ask me to go find that file. And I could just go back and say, here it is. And everything's going to be just fine. It's going to find that linkage and let me continue editing. So it's not a big deal, but the easiest way to manage it is just simply to keep them in the same place. Once we've done that, now I'm going to close this. There's one more thing to consider, and that is, what if at some point you decide you want to put everything back into the master file? Maybe Adobe adds support for PSB files in the future, or you do something else that shrinks your file, or whatever it is. You can also extract this content in Lumenzia by going back up to that same menu with Convert Layers to Linked PSB. And if there's an external smart object anywhere in your layers, you'll have this option to re-import external content. Just click on that. Lumenzia is going to go back, grab the contents from that smart object, and throw them back into your document. We can see all that content is here. It is not going to get rid of your external file, so that's protected. You can just simply at this point go and delete it if you want. Everything's back in the same place. So great way now to work non-destructively with images of essentially any size. I think the limits on PSB are 300,000 pixels on the long edge. So the ability to add focus stacking and multiple luminosity masks, whatever, your overhead is essentially unlimited. You can do pretty much anything you want with these files and see them in Lightroom now. And for more information about Lumenzia, head over to gregbensphotography.com/Lumenzia.